Imagine a machine so powerful that it can create trillions of dollars out of thin air, decide which nations rise and which ones collapse. And yet almost no one alive today has ever seen its operating manual. It doesn't have smokestacks. It doesn't have a factory floor. It runs 24/7 inside marble buildings in Basel, Frankfurt, Washington, and London, guarded by PhDs in suits who speak a language the average citizen was never taught. This machine has a name, but you've been trained never to say it out loud in polite company. Tonight, we're going to rip the cover off it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the modern world is financed, and why almost every government on earth is now trapped inside the same invisible cage that destroyed empires for the last 400 years. Stay until the end, because the third takeaway will change the way you look at every headline about inflation, war. Most people think money is created by governments printing cash or minting coins. That hasn't been true for a very long time. Today, 97% of the money you spend started its life as an entry on a private bank spreadsheet. But how did we get here? To understand the machine, we have to go back to a quiet revolution that almost no history book mentions by name. Yet it quietly conquered the world. It begins in the muddy streets of 17th century Amsterdam. Dutch merchants had so much gold and silver from global trade that they ran out of space in their vaults. Goldsmith bankers started issuing paper receipts for the metal stored with them. Those receipts began circulating as money. One day the goldsmiths noticed something strange. Only about 10% of depositors ever came back to withdraw physical metal at the same time. So, they did what any rational businessman would do. They started issuing more paper receipts than they actually had gold. Fractional reserve banking was born. Fast forward to 1694. England is losing a war against France, and the treasury is empty. A shady Scottish financier named William Paterson walks into a smoky London tavern and pitches King William III a deal that will change history forever. Let a private company lend money to the government at interest. In exchange, give that company the sole right to issue England's paper money. The king signs. The Bank of England is born, the world's first central bank that is privately controlled, yet has a government monopoly. Paterson's own words in the original prospectus. The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. He literally wrote it down. The machine just got its first engine. For the next 200 years, the model spreads like a virus. Napoleon creates the Banque de France on the same template. Private families, Rothschilds in London and Paris, Warburgs in Hamburg, Morgans and Rockefellers in New York become the shareholders and directors behind the curtains. By the late 1800s, the system is so profitable that the United States is the only major nation without a central bank. 3 failed attempts: first bank 1791, second bank 1816. Then comes the winter of 1907. A stock market panic, banks failing. J.P. Morgan personally locks bankers in his library until they agree to a solution. 6 years later, in 1913, while most congressmen are home for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act passes. Woodrow Wilson signs it on December 23. Years later he would write, "I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world." The American Republic just quietly handed the machine its final missing piece. With a global network of central banks now in place, the machine hits the accelerator. World War I is financed with debt that never existed before 1914. World War II multiplies it again. By 1944, at Bretton Woods, the US dollar, backed by gold and American military power, is crowned the world reserve currency. Every other nation pegs their money to the dollar. The dollar is pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. But the machine never stops growing debt faster than the real economy. By the 1960s, France, led by Charles de Gaulle, starts cashing in dollars for physical gold. The vault is draining. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon appears on television and temporarily suspends gold convertibility. The word temporary is still there 54 years later. The last restraint is cut. From this moment on, every major currency on earth is backed by nothing but confidence and the promise of a central bank. The machine is now running wide open with no speed limiter. What happens when you remove the last anchor? Exponential debt. US federal debt. 1971 gives $400 billion. Today, $36 trillion and climbing $1 trillion every 100 days. Global debt, $300 trillion, 3.5 times world GDP. Every attempted fix just feeds the machine more. 2008 crisis gives central banks create $15 trillion in new money. 2020 pandemic gives another $20 trillion in 24 months. Interest rates to zero. QE, yield curve control, repo markets, bail-ins, CBDC trials. Every tool is designed to keep the debt growing because if it ever stops, the system implodes overnight. The machine has become the economy. Look at the pattern. Spain 16th century, flooded with silver. Prices rose 400% and empire bankrupt. John Law's France, 1716 to 1720. Paper money backed by Mississippi shares. Hyperinflation. Revolution. Maret tahun 1923. Zimbabwe 2008. Venezuela 2018. Same machine, different century. Today the entire developed world is running the biggest debt-to-GDP ratios in recorded history. Yet inflation is only now starting to show its teeth. Why? Because the machine invented a new trick. Financial repression plus dollar weaponization forces the rest of the world to absorb the inflation. But cracks are spreading. BRICS nations stockpiling 40% of global gold reserves. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil. 300 bilateral trade deals, bypassing the dollar since 2022. The same pattern that ended the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the French assignat, and the British pound sterling is repeating in slow motion. All modern money is debt created by private banks and lent to governments at interest. The system literally requires eternal debt growth to avoid collapse. Every previous reserve currency died when its issuing empire could no longer force the world to absorb its inflation. The dollar is now at that exact inflection point. Central banks are not your friend and never were. They are the operating system of the debt machine. And their only real mandate is to keep it running at all costs, even if that cost is your purchasing power, your savings, and eventually the currency itself. The machine is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. The question is no longer if, but when, and how hard. And when the confidence finally snaps, the people who understand the machine's instruction manual will not be the ones standing in bread lines. The next 10 years will separate those who treated money as a spectator sport from those who studied the actual rulebook. If this video made you see the financial system in a completely different light, do 3 things right now. Hit the like button. It tells YouTube this topic matters. Subscribe and ring the bell, because the next episode exposes the hidden layer most cold bugs and Bitcoin maxis still don't understand. Drop a comment with the word machine so I know you made it to the end and watched with your eyes open. Stay curious. Stay sovereign. I'll see you in the next one.